Peace and respect to you all. Welcome to Demolished Doctrine, the beginning of the end of religions. Tonight, again, on a Wednesday, we have our friends Steve and Mac. And I asked them, they had nothing to show right now. So we're just going to jump right into it. So Mac and I thought we'd do an experiment. Mac, you want to give some detail on that, please?
Yeah. So if you caught us last week, Richard asked me to try to work on translating a verse in Genesis according to his reading frame. I did the best that I could and didn't really spend a lot of time on it, but kind of shot from the hip and gave it a whirl with what I understood from his methodology. And it was a really cool episode, in my opinion, really interesting discussion. But when we came to the end of it, we sort of talked about where I might have had a possible bias influence the way that I engaged with the text. And one of the biases that I acknowledged was that I do have a fondness for Richard, and I am trying to really understand and get inside his reading frame and his sort of worldview here. And so that, can lead to bias. I'm trying to find, in other words, at least in some way, what I hope he wants me to find. That might be part of it. So Richard said, as a solution to that, why don't you pick a verse in a part of the Bible that we haven't explored together yet? And so I really like that idea, and I gave it a lot of thought. I mean, there's a ton of the Bible we haven't explored together yet. And I happen to have a favorite book of the Bible, and the first verses of that book are not only some of my favorite verses in the Bible, but they're also completely related to the work that we've been doing in Genesis as well, because they refer to the beginning. And so it's John, the book of John, the Gospel of John, which has always been my favorite gospel. And I just dove into the Greek, the variety of Greek that was written in, and did a similar process that we did with the Hebrew in Genesis, and found that the stacked kind of layered meanings for most of the words were much shallower in Greek than they are in Hebrew. And because of that, it was more challenging as well as much more straightforward to work with. So I had to sort of pause and really explore certain words that should be obvious, but words like theos, which means God, but it doesn't just mean God. And words like logos, which means word, sort of, but really not at all. I mean, I have a lovely Spanish-speaking friend who I discussed this verse with, and they don't translate it that way even in Spanish. They translate it to the word verb. So in the beginning was the verb, which I think actually might be closer to a better meaning, but still not what it means at all. So of course things start to unwind and rewind together, and coherent concept came to me, and I wrote it down. And so and then during this process, Richard reached out to me and said, hey, well, actually I reached out to him with a description of the experience, and to Steve as well, just because I wanted them to understand that it's been kind of a thrilling thing for me, and that I've gained some understanding about just sort of the different qualities that different languages can have in the ancient world. And this is new and interesting to me in a real way, like in a really engaging way. And so, I'm just really enjoying it, and had some ideas about some of the implications just outside of the text, just about what I've discovered in the language itself. And Richard responded that, and maybe I engaged his curiosity, but he said, maybe I should translate this same text at the same time as you. And then when we meet on Wednesday, we can compare. So we can compare today our independently arrived at translations of John 1, and I think Richard went through to John 6 or 7, 4. Okay, to John 4. I went to John 2. So I did 1:1 and 1:2, and I really just want to caveat, not in any kind of false humility way, but just in a way that I want to acknowledge that I don't feel like I'm finished with what I've done here. It feels unfinished to me, and the feeling I get is that I could spend a lot of years on these two verses. So, but having said all that, let's read it out. And I'm sorry that I don't have it in electronic.
Some small comments on some of the things you already said.
Yeah,
excellent. Right. Yeah. So far as the ancient language structures, and a person can call me crazy, I literally don't care what they think of my mental states. But in looking at biblical Hebrew specifically, and I haven't studied any else, it looks like the language it's a little bit too convenient. It's a little bit too good for describing what God means and what angels are. It's a little bit too good at that. When you can have very lengthy and specific descriptions of a singular individual, all in Hebrew, and it comes out as names of persons and places, that's too convenient. Right. That's just way too much. So it looks to me like it almost looks like a contrived language designed for this purpose.
You mean the Hebrew?
The Hebrew, yeah. And I mean, it's the only foreign language I've studied, and English is such a hodgepodge of a bunch of crap thrown together. You could never get that kind of an organizational thing out of it, I think, because it comes from so many different sources. But I wonder if I looked into these other ancient languages, if they would look much the same, like they were just designed to teach about spirituality and not much else. And maybe that's the reason we have so many shortcomings in our languages, is because we don't have that in our roots of our language in Greek, Latin, French, and German, basically. We don't seem to have that.
I can't help but wonder, actually, Richard, since you've read and sort of translated a lot from the Hebrew yourself, do you get a really different feeling when you read Mac's work on the Greek?
This is the first time we've done it. So I don't know what's going to happen.
Okay. Me neither. Although I heard a rumor about the Bible that the main character dies near the end.
I've heard that, but it's a fake out. Because
it's like comic books. He comes alive again after getting killed.
Yeah. Well, he's not the only one that does in the story. Actually, there's several that do, and that's what we're talking about in some depth. But yeah, the Canaanites are completely wiped out. They show up later. Goliath is killed twice, once in 1 Samuel, once in 2 Samuel. You could just keep going like that.
We should make a list. Sorry, Mac, go ahead.
That's okay. I think you're referring to a document that actually Richard sent to you. It's the Google Docs link.
Yes.
Yeah, that wasn't what I did. That was what Richard did simultaneously. He hasn't seen mine, and neither have you.
Oh, okay. Boy, am I screwed up.
No worries. It took me a second to figure it out. I was like, he's confused about something.
Oh, I thought it was you, Mac, who wrote that thing about the first bit of John.
Right. No, I did a different one, and I haven't seen that yet either. So
this is what I get for missing meetings.
But Mac, I think you're going to be happy with what you see in the translation that I'd love to say that I did, but it's just the words that are there, and I threw in some conjunctions.
Right.
But it's just the actual words that are there. I don't think it's. I think it's the least creative thing I've ever seen.
Right on. Well, I look forward to seeing it.
It does feel very, very weird when I see Richard's work, because I'm so used to the poetry of the Bible. So in the beginning there was the Word, and the Word was God, and with God, and what have you. And it just flows so beautifully. and then you basically try to reconstruct it from the Hebrew, and then you learn what wasn't there or what was placed in the text by translators.
Right.
And well, anyway, you already know this stuff, but I just felt the need to get it out.
It's a Tyndale, the phrase "stranger in a strange land."
Yes,
is a Tyndale from the Old Testament, and where he got that from is from the idea of an alien sojourner into a land, and what that misses in context definitionally is that sojourner entering in has a righteous claim to things already. That's completely missing from the idea. And it's really talking about how Christ is the traveler that comes into the community and teaches them the truth, and already has claims, even though he is not recognized by them. They think of him as a stranger, etc., etc. So when you're missing, like for instance, if I say draw back your head. That you have a picture of your mind of, okay, maybe something's coming at my face, but I was talking about your bow and arrow. If you don't have the context of what draw back your head means,
I was thinking something gruesome as drawing back your head because you're about to be decapitated.
Okay, see,
yeah. So
you want. Now you see how as soon as I say bow and arrow, you have no choice about it.
Yeah.
Okay, just like
that. But it to me, the task that you guys have set for yourselves is so daunting. Reading, taking some Hebrew from the Bible and trying to reconstruct it in English. I'm amazed anyone's able to do it and make it sound, as your word, Richard, coherent. It seems very incoherent to me. And
I think, I don't know how much of the translation that I'm doing you've read, but there were times I was so profoundly unimpressed by the translation they came up with that I wrote definitionally the actual words and in the order they come in underneath of the translation that I wrote. And then I included the King James translation under that, or in some order like that, doesn't really matter. So that a person could see the actual words and how they got the King James out of it, but also what I was saying and how I came to what I came to. Okay. So I think what I'm doing is, like I said, extremely uncreative and not challenging. All I have to do is translate enough of it, which I didn't do the translations. I don't know what those words mean. But ancient scholars who are natural Hebrew speakers and stuff, and they wrote down what the words mean in a different language, and now we know what they meant. And just list them in order. And then if you do 2 or 3 verses, or maybe as much as 10 to get context, it just starts to flow, and you just kind of have no choice about it. And so you have to throw in a would, if, when, you, they, because those words aren't included. And when you look at the King James, where it says things like and is a horrible, horrible word that's way too vague in the English, because and also, although you can contextualize, you can say they're the same thing. Okay. When you say also, it's the idea of adding on to it. When you say and, that might separate the two ideas completely.
Yes.
So it's not accurate to say and instead of also, but they did that a lot, but when there's an also, it's there's an actual Jewish word there, Hebrew word for that. And when there would be something like the idea and, there is no word for that. So you could never translate some Hebrew thing as and.
Interesting. Well, what do we make of this? Hebrew doesn't lend itself to pronouns or prepositions or conjunctions, or maybe I'm speaking too much there.
No, well, I think it's just extremely functional and brief. Okay, there's like not a lot of extra words in it, and And I think that when people speak that language, it looks to me from where I sit here, not speaking the language, that there's a lot of necessary contextual prior reference needed in order to know what they're talking about. And at first, you could hear it a lot of ways. But the more they talk about it, the more it gets defined down, and eventually you have no choice what they mean. Like draw back your head, use your arm to pull back the string and draw back the head.
Oh, yes, okay.
Something like that.
Mm. It's a question that bothers me too, Steve. There's, we're talking about thousands of years of translations getting, missing depth that we're finding right in front of us. There has to be a story there. There has to be, that's a problem, and it's modern scholars as well. So you don't even have to like say it was a telephone game or something, because modern scholars have access to the most ancient documents, to the most primary documents. And they can independently go through it, and they still independently go through it and find I guess what we'll call the classic interpretation of those words, those phrases. So, and I either don't understand their methodology at all, or there's something else. There's something like universally biasing them. I think.
If you don't mind.
Yeah, I
think what's going on there is just really obvious and objectionable, and it's probably one of the things that people like Iron object to the most. Iron Charioteer takes his screen name from a line in the Bible where it says that Yahweh could not defeat this enemy because they had chariots of iron.
Mm.
Now the Christian should have read that, right? But will maintain God's omnipotence, despite the fact that it directly says, hey, there's some things that I just can't do nothing about it. I think it personally refers to free will versus free won't versus oppression. That's what it's actually talking about. That if something is stubborn and tough and enough, then without like being immoral toward them, you can't defeat it. They're just too stubborn.
So are you telling us that
a really good name for Iron Charioteer?
Well, am I mistaken? So that passage doesn't mean what it seems to mean? That it's not about God being unable to defeat those with iron chariots?
Well, it is. It directly says God is unable to defeat those with iron chariots. Now, what's it talking about?
Yeah.
I mean, if I take literally a figurative story, then no matter how literal I am, I'm being figurative. I don't have a choice about it.
Okay.
So this is a series of colloquial expressions in translation into English, and it didn't read that way at all to the Hebrew.
Ah, all right.
So the problem is more modern people thinking that the Hebrew were very figurative, when it doesn't look that way at all in the original language. It looks dry and boring as hell, but it doesn't look figurative.
Well, I'm astonished because I'm not sure what to think now, which is what I basically do on this show. I just say I don't know what to think, which is not helpful. But so the expression of being unable to defeat them because they had iron chariots, were the Hebrews being figurative or were they being literal? I'm not sure now.
No, it's like you said, you appreciate the poetry that you don't see in what I'm doing. The poetry ain't there.
Yes.
There is no poetry in the Hebrew. Now, you could use certain words and make it sound more poetic and pretty, but it's all just extremely literal and kind of dry, actually.
Hell. What kind of holy book is this then? I want to read it.
It's not the Quran, I'll tell you that.
I've heard it's very beautiful.
The Quran, yeah.
I've heard that too.
Yeah, maybe one day I'll read a translation of it. Maybe it'll be your next book to tackle, Richard.
Well, the problem with us reading it ourselves, not being of that nation, of that tongue, is that because the words are different and the accents are different in our language, you wouldn't hear the poetry in it.
Yeah.
Because it's kind of like where let me think of a good example. Mandarin Chinese. It's not just the word that they're using, but the way that they say it.
Inflection, you mean?
Yeah, extreme inflection, and it's that inflection within that language that the Quran was actually written in. That inflection that's necessary for it to mean what it's supposed to mean causes the poetic musical sound to it.
Right.
So if I read it, I don't see that.
No. Well, I remember an interesting thing happened when I learned a bit about one particular Bible passage, and in our translations in common use, we hear things like, "And the kingdom of God will last forever and ever, amen." And it turned out that was a translation from, "And the kingdom of God will last for a very long time."
Yes, that's right.
And one sounds beautiful and is inaccurate, and the other one sounds terribly mundane and not very promising.
But it's accurate.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's exactly what you find.
If you look at that within context, you're going to find that it doesn't say it, as you said, it says a very long time, but what it means by a very long time is so long of a time you can't imagine what that means. And that might mean something to, like, colloquially, it might mean to a brain, it might mean forever, because you can't really grasp what 10,000 years is, you know?
Yeah, especially if you can barely count. I mean, if you're some sheep herder, you know, I not to disparage people for living, 3,000 years ago. They were doing whatever they could, and they managed to survive.
Worldwide education has improved. It
yes,
definitely has.
Although it seems to be on the decline lately, education. But what can you do?
Definitely in some places, yeah. I'll answer this question quickly, but I'm not sure really like what aspect of Sumerian and Akkadian cultures you're interested in me commenting on. I don't know a lot about either of them, but when I was putting together some homeschool criteria, we went deep into the Sumerian mathematical system, which was really cool and fun to do with the children by pressing popsicle sticks into clay. And it's a really actually pretty sophisticated mathematical system and impressive, I guess. Although apparently, according to the historians, what happened was they suddenly were able, because of agriculture, they were suddenly able to achieve free time, which gave them the chance to and the need to solve problems that they had to solve before. And so math might have become a thing before a written language or other written language. Anyway, so that's really interesting. And then what I find about the Akkadian cultures is very mysterious and sort of hard to pin down exactly what roles they played outside of their small kind of blossoming empire that quickly also faded away, like a lot of the empires back then. But I don't know a lot else outside of that. My thoughts are it's pretty cool. It's pretty cool to like try to figure it out and like what they were doing and how they lived and stuff and what they might have known. I think it's good questions to ask. So.
And there's his response. Briefly.
Yeah.
Okay. I think that's all the build up that we need. Let's get to it.
Okay.
So you said you have it written, thereby you meant written on paper.
That's
so I'm
right.
not going to be able to share the screen. So
I'm afraid not.
I'm going to ask people to listen very carefully to whatever it is you say. And if they come up with questions, please type them immediately into the chat, and we'll address it as we're finishing up the thought process, the translation that Mac did of the beginning of John. And if you missed the beginning of the show, and some of you did, I also did the same thing, but we did not coordinate. And we're here to compare notes and let you watch what happens. So it should be a good time.
All right. So I've got John 1:1. At the extreme edge of creation, I stood teaching. I spoke of history, reason, rules of living, morality. I made predictions and calculations and spoke of the nature of God. I have been among the things of God, and having the qualities of God, I am identical to God. And then 1:2 is...
Let's stop right there, because
okay.
I think that's a complete thought in and of itself.
Yeah, that's true.
And the next one's going to be it's a related topic, but the next thought, if you don't mind. So okay. I'm gonna bring this up, and I'm gonna go to just full screen so everyone else can read this as they will. I'd love to be doing this with yours as well if we ever do something like this again.
Okay, I'll electrify it next time.
Sure, that's a good way to say it. Why not?
Turn it into electrons.
Okay, so this is John according to the reading frame I've adopted, which means very little to some and a lot to others. In the definite position of the first thing done, where you are, I was God, and that which maintained and demanded and directed thought and actions. Also, this maintaining and demanding and directing of thought and action was at the disposal of good and godly entities. Also, this maintaining and demanding and directing of thought and action, I was, and it is God.
It's funny how the Greek translation that Mac is working off of has a lot more theology in it. In the sense of Jesus, if it harkens back to that notion of Jesus being begotten, not made, and Jesus being the Word. And yours working from what, but yours, Richard, is also from the Greek. Am I right?
Yes.
Yeah, we use the same.
It's the same lexicon, actually. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now,
so who's wrong then?
The words. Well, neither one. They don't disagree with each other. I kept the words also. He omitted them. Okay. He didn't find it necessary to write also at all or portray that idea, although it is in the original text. I'm sure he would say.
Yeah, I do.
And this is the ideas of like what is right to do. I don't see them disagreeing in that at all. And the only thing I think that I got that Mac maybe didn't, and I'm not sure, I'd have to hear what Mac, would you read it again, please, from yours?
Yes. Okay, at the extreme edge of creation, that's my first phrase. Definitely interesting to compare to yours. At the extreme edge of creation, I stood teaching. I originally translated that as there taught the Son, but because there is a concept of the Son there, Steve. So I mean, but it's pretty vague, and so I didn't think it needed to be explicit. I guess I don't know. And then I put what he taught was I spoke of history, reason, rules of living or morality, made predictions and calculations, as well as the nature of God. I have
you
been
can certainly get all that out of the text, no doubt. But I just decided to be a little bit more brief and hit it as topics, overall topics, instead of individual fixated positions. You could go either way with it, but I don't think that really does anything different, other than in this case, in that part, you used more words than I did, and I just hit the main topics.
Also, the list is actually longer than that.
It is a lot longer than that.
Yeah, I just kind of tried to be all encompassing as well.
Yeah,
so.
it's like 30 more ideas than what you listed, and you tried to hit just the main topics of those ideas. But I just went with categories. I just went with categories on it because you could just be writing stuff forever on that.
Right. And then it's I have been among the things of God, and having the qualities of God, I am identical to God.
That's pretty good, yeah.
So. Well, that speaks to my Catholic background.
In more of what Mac did there, I was inclined to write every single thing that it implies or necessitates. Mm-hmm. That it's teaching and counseling and love and demanding of action in thought, mind, heart, society, math, physics. I mean, it's really extensive.
Right.
And but then I kind of got lazy because this was just a simple experiment. And I'm not really trying to do the work. And I thought, well, I'm just going to hit the main topics and stop right there.
Mm-hmm. Of course, maybe the words used in Greek could imply all those things, but it doesn't mean that the original author meant to discuss physics at all. Maybe he meant to discuss morality, but not, because so many words have multiple usages. I'm impressed that you were able to do any of this. My brain would have failed in short order.
I don't think so. I think you would have been fine. So this that I have underneath that is the literal list. Okay. Mm-hmm. Of the not all of the implications or even necessary extrapolation of everything that it could mean, but just the base ideas and in the order given right there. In, by, with, which is not the same thing as beside of.
Right.
Because beside of doesn't include inside of. But in, by, with could include ideas like throughout, saturating, covering, all those kinds of ideas were beside, and sometimes the King James does this, they use the word beside instead of with. And that's not the same thing at all, which I really object to, but of a fixed position, in, by, with of a fixed position, meaning that it's specifically in, by, or with. Okay. So it's indicative of either time or location, that kind of fixed position. And so anyway, you can read it if you want. It's right there. Would you want to go to the next one, man? Or are we done?
Yeah.
We done with that one? I think we are.
Yeah.
I mean,
the next one is much shorter, but I got I stood in the new creation with the one you call God. And that's how I translated 1:2. John 1:2, which is very different than what it says, which is the same was in the beginning with God, what it says in the King James. So I guess it's not that much different.
Well, I tell you, all the root words are still there, but that is a different idea. You want to say it again, please?
I said I stood in the new creation with the one you call God.
Well, that is startling because it really sets out Christ as a completely different individual rather than someone who is simultaneously God and other than God.
And there's a lot throughout the work, Steve, that demands that. Actually, this is a small sample of it.
That's true, though.
Kind of disturbing to have your long-held.
Well,
I always believed that meant something or other, and now you find out it means something else.
Well, the logical problem of the Trinity is a logical problem because it's a logical problem. It's just impossible. It doesn't make sense. Now,
as Catholics, we were taught it was a divine mystery that was beyond human nature. We may have analogies for it, but
Okay, so let me see if I got this right. The Pope, the mouthpiece of God who builds bridges, that's what his name means, has declared that he can't pray to God and get the answer, and he can't write it down. Even if we couldn't understand the answer, shouldn't we have one? But instead, what I think is actually going on here is it's the mechanic that says to the little old lady, well, you know, your 73 Dodge there is vapor locked. There's no such freaking thing. There is no mystery of the faith. There's only prayer that didn't happen due to pride.
Well, I'll speak to His Holiness about it, but
about time to put that guy in line.
Yeah, next chance I get. But they're too busy covering up things, as you know. They've got a big schedule ahead of them.
They're very busy. I mean, there's a lot that needs covered. Let's face it.
Oh, for sure. Sorry, that was excessively glib, but it's how I feel.
It was pretty good, actually.
Steve, I don't know if you know, but there's a big portion of the Protestant side of Christianity that claims to be able to defend the Trinity rationally, and that's. I mean, imagine that. That's even a bigger stretch than saying that it's just a mystery.
I can solve the problem of the Trinity easily from within the Bible, and it's just this: theists assert God has personage. That's the whole problem. If you go with the biblical definition of God, a set of seven spirits with many, many repercussions, having no personage in and of itself, no ability to make a decision, but a set of standards, you get rid of the personage there and all the troubles just float right out the window.
Well,
so
it changes the notion of God is.
There's no problem. What's that?
Well, it changes the notion of what God is. If you say is composed of seven spirits.
Well, if I'm going to base my religion on a text, and what the text says is God is spirit, that's a direct quote. God is the seven spirits of God, that's a direct quote. God is those seven lampstands put before the earth, a set of standards of morality and all the repercussions of them for directing a society, and that's what God is. And besides, we're not inclined to worship a being anyway. Doesn't that feel icky? It feels icky to me to worship a being. And all of the angels and all of the saints and even the Christ, when faced with someone trying to worship them, says the same thing. Stand on your feet. You are my brother in this. I am not your God. So there you go. I think if I'm going to believe in God and I'm going to call myself something like a Christian, then I have to refer to the Christian text for definition of God. I can't just make up whatever I like. Sorry, go ahead.
Doesn't this push the divine mystery just back one step? Instead of God having three persons, one God but three persons, we're saying God has seven spirits, and we have
that pushes it back at all. I mean, every society that has any limited amount of success has a set of rules that they adhere to. And if you don't adhere to the rules, you're killed, thrown in jail, whatever. Okay, we all have something like that.
Sure.
And of course, every set is different. But I think if we definitively knew, like medically, metaphysically, biologically, what the human animal is, we could construct a set of perfect ideals for the human animal that would work universally. And I think that's what's being described as quote unquote God.
And you mentioned the seven spirits might refer to the seven virtues.
You could call them virtues. That would be fine.
Right. Interesting.
Okay, Mac, would you read yours again? Because we kind of got derailed there, sidetracked.
Yeah.
I enjoyed it. It wasn't useless, but...
Thank you. Yeah, those virtues are actually, I think, referred to in 1:1, or at least that God is a set of qualities. You can find that there anyway. But 1:2 is, I stood in the new creation with the one you call God. And I think Steve's absolutely correct that sort of definitively separates two classes of beings or two beings, and maybe stood isn't the best word there. Actually, that's my most controversial word in my process. So that stood with, or
I didn't exercise near the kind of commitment that you did in doing this. I just ripped through it real quick. I had 3 cigarettes during that time, which means it took about an hour and a half to do this. So I just ripped through it.
Let's see what you got.
Soul and wonder in themselves is this happenstance why I was the absolute first thing to do at the limit of ultimate before time in regards of any good God. So it's 2 separate beings, one of them obviously not the God, at the absolute or limitation or beginning of something. That's what I got.
That's interesting, because that's the concept of the extremity of creation that I got in the first part. You seem to have applied it in the second part as well, which is the same word is used. So I just didn't use it in the second part, but so that's
Well, I'm kind of taken aback because I feel like I've been reading the Bible wrong all these years, if you know what I mean.
I have that feeling too.
You're saying now what Mac said about a month and a half ago. And I feel much the same way, guys. I have to admit, I don't think this is expressive. I don't think what I'm doing is inventive. I don't think it's art in any way. It does. The more I read on this, and I laugh and I cry doing this, and I enjoy it a lot. This is, I've been saying, okay, that's got to be inaccurate. There's no continuous context. The context flip-flops back and forth 1,000 times. And we ignored many Hebrew words that we perceived as names of places and people and animals and stuff. Because flock doesn't mean flock. In fact, money doesn't mean money. But what money actually means is your work that redeemed a flock from destruction. That's what money means. But when you read it in the King James, it just came out money. Well, my God, you missed half the idea, at least there. And sheep doesn't mean a herd of animals. When it says redeemed flock, it doesn't mean that. It actually means a group of people who wandered aimlessly, not knowing where to go. Which is why that story is always repeating in the Bible, saying, I'll leave the 99 behind to go fetch the one. And I don't know, there's so many references of wolves and sheep and all of this sort of, it's all that same contextual idea, just repeated a lot. But if you read sheep or flock of sheep in the King James, you're just like, well, the preacher said that's talking about us, and I kind of get the idea that it's talking about us anyway. Right. But you don't really see the depth of what it's saying when you're reading it in English. It's just poor. It's just shallow and poor. It's poetic, though. I'll give you that.
I feel like I should say something here, but
okay.
I'm
up. Did. Congratulations. Well done.
Yes. Well, I filled the silence, though. That's the important thing.
Yes, you did. That was excellent. No, I don't feel uncomfortable about silence. Sometimes we need it, and there's nothing wrong with taking the time to stop and think about a thing and just shut your mouth. If I'm on YouTube, I'm probably a zealot. That's fair. That doesn't mean I need to talk constantly. So.
Okay, so is there any more of it you guys have translated?
Richard went further, and he went a lot further in Genesis. and I'm trying to keep up with it, but it's there's a lot to dive into there. But he went 2 more verses into John, and I'd love to see where this went. So,
well, I'll just read them real quick.
Okay.
Bear thoughts and questions in mind as I do.
Okay.
And we'll see what happens. All right. Let's see. I want to get over to the screen where I can read it. And every individual thing existing was channeled through the soul and wonder in themselves. Also, an expansive empty space separated them who came into existence. Moreover, not one who came into existence by any other way came into existence.
Huh.
And you have anything on that, guys?
No, but I like the way it sounds, actually. This might be the most poetic thing you've written, Richard.
It's just the way that it's written by necessity. It does have a meter to it, though, doesn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
To me, it sounds very blunt and matter of fact. Sounds like a tech manual to me. Although having the idea of a soul and the idea of the feeling of wonder is definitely, that's a transcendent concept, or those seem to me to be transcendent concepts. So,
am I reading? Oh, I'm sorry, Mac. Please keep going.
No, that's okay. It's especially the last part, that there's one who came into existence by, or not one who came into existence by another way came into existence. Like that's almost like redundant, you know? And,
yeah, right.
Yeah,
it's really overstated.
But maybe deliberately.
Right.
You have this notion, then, at least to me, that there were some beings, perhaps angels, who were in existence as existence came into existence, and then at a later time, there were beings like humans that came into existence.
Right.
Well,
that's true.
When I was reading this at first, the definitions, before I even, interjected the words like "an" and "who," I did have to put in "an" and "who" here. I did. But none of the rest of it. This is like extremely direct. It almost took no conjunctions for the English to work. But
interesting.
Yeah, it was pretty good all by itself. Didn't have to do much. This harkened me immediately back to the days of Genesis, the days of creation, where things that existed in heaven were put onto the planet with purpose,
right,
to fulfill a purpose. And then the first batch of humans to be put onto the planet were told, go and fulfill the purpose of this wilderness. So, plants and people who were formed and kept not in the garden whatsoever, which is the entirety of the planet by description and definition, were placed onto the planet and in a certain order. And by the way, what we see in the fossil record is that same order, that there was first atmosphere and then water, and then simple to complex plant life and some things that you can't figure out whether or not the Bible doesn't mention plant animals, but we do see that in the fossil record. Then animals, and finally mankind. Mankind's the last thing to get here.
Where is the expansive empty space phrase?
Let's see, I got it written right here below it.
Okay.
All forms individually to come into existence, channeled through soul and wonder in themselves, also empty expansive space, right there.
Okay, got it.
I did put expansive before the word empty, but it works better in English. It doesn't change the idea. Because the roots of the word separated right there means separated by a great expansive space specifically, where there's nothing.
Gotcha.
Okay.
Huh.
And the only place that I know of that's like that is the face of the deep. That is to say, outer space.
That's what it reminded me of. Exactly. Yeah.
It's hearkening back to the same thing it said before.
Right.
All right. Are we done with that one?
Yeah. Let's do 4.
Let me hit this real quick, but this is starting to look like I'm showing off, and I'm not. I just think it's super interesting.
Yeah.
Definitively, by that soul and wonder in themselves. This is talking about how angels feel, by the way, and why they're motivated to do things. Is the existent I was of the vital and blessed life, I mean, causing vitality and blessed life. Also, this existent I was is that shining manifest light to human beings called mankind. Okay, so who is that shining manifest light? Who'd that be? So this brings me directly back to Jesus always was, will be, from the beginning to the end, without fail and continuously, is exactly where that brings me back to. Oh, I'm sorry, did I take that down too soon, or are we done with it?
Well, I have it up on my own screen, so I can refer back to it. When you say the word existent, to me that implies existence, but of belonging to God. That He is.
Right, but it's still conditional on beings experiencing it.
Okay.
So, I mean, it's not unfair to say before there was man, there was no God of man.
Right.
It's totally fair to say that from what I'm finding in the text. I think it's not completely fair to say, as some have, we are the God maker, but I think it'd be better if it was something like we are those that necessitate God. That is, we need it. Whereas, bees have the queen and drones and female workers and dances and standards and hive cleaning every day at 4:35.
Right.
They don't need a set of rules. Everything is intrinsic about them, and they all carry it out perfectly, or there'd be no hive. But as for us, we're so not experiencing free will, but able to make choices based on our own private experiences, which varies so much between us from culture to culture, family to family, and even between siblings, that we need some standards here to really get along well.
Yeah.
This is an opinion question, but I'll take a stab at it. What the heck?
Good one.
I think there's no such thing as something infinite, but it could be in infinite forms if it collapses and reforms in pockets always. That's my answer to that. So because differentials of energy can destroy and create in their nature and do constantly, and we see the cosmic web, this exchange of energy over time, space, distance, there's no wonder in my mind why stars explode and new ones are formed. It's just a reformation. It's just the same thing happening in a new place. Peace and respect, Moon Medi. I think I saw that name once before.
Yes, Moon Medi is a good friend of mine.
Oh, really?
Nice.
Mm-hmm. Don't hold that against her.
Okay, a person can be intelligent and well-adjusted and accept truth and still like quirky people.
Yeah, thank you.
Totally okay. I'm sorry, quirky zebras.
Yes. I'm nothing if not quirky.
Yes, at least.
By the way, I wanted to call attention to your passage where that shining manifest light to human beings called mankind. I assume the shining light is God, or maybe just Jesus. I'm not sure.
Well, there is no being God,
Mm-hmm.
and it's always Jesus, which is why the story is all about Jesus.
Okay.
And he is that manifest light to human beings.
Sort of like
problem,
Prometheus.
well, yeah, actually, that is one of those stories. Also, there's so many. We could go on that tangent forever, but it's necessary to qualify the kind of human being you're talking about as mankind within context, because angels are also human beings, but not man. So if I'm going to differentiate between kinds of human beings, the waters above and the waters below, then I have to write which human being I'm talking about.
These are the ones called mankind.
Mm-hmm.
I noticed in your notes below there's a section with baffling wind.
Yes.
And
baffling wind means it means something that you can feel and not see that's puzzling.
Right.
It's a direct reference to the human spirit.
That's what I was wondering. Because wind and
colloquially
spirit.
use the word soul.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's the breath of life, the spirit of man, all those words. Does that help it make sense for you?
Well, I don't, to be honest with you, I don't feel I'd ever be well educated enough to put my imprimatur on it, because I would always, if I don't know the original language, but I'm just, say, translating based on what each individual word or phrase means, it's a bit like when you use Google Translate to translate into one language and then back again. It can get really weird. But I understand your argument.
It depends on it if all of the verbs and nouns are there. And I could use only verbs and nouns and nothing else at all. And using only those two kinds, if I spoke enough about a topic, you'd catch on and have no choice about it. So I don't think it's really that subject to interpretation when there's more than just nouns and verbs in it originally.
Yes, but when it's talking about how the universe came into existence and who Jesus is, well, no, I just mean in general, the Bible.
No, the Bible doesn't. That's a Christian interpretation with a lot of liberality. For instance, the Hebrew word for a singular powerful being is Eloah.
Okay.
For a group of powerful beings, Elohim.
Mm-hmm.
Eloah is not in the text anywhere. It always means, when it says Elohim, that's the plural. It means a group of powerful beings. When you read it in the King James and everything else, including the Young's literal, which is not literal, don't believe him, he's a liar. It is not literal. It reads God there. Can't mean God. It has to at least be written gods. Because there is a Hebrew word for singular powerful being. That exists. And if that's what they meant, that's what would be written there. Not what they meant.
I wonder if you said Eloah instead of
A-A.
Yeah.
Yeah, that eem means plural. Yeah.
So would that appear in the Dead Sea Scrolls somewhere where people could point to it and refer to it?
Haven't read them, have no idea.
Right.
I'm only 10 years old this year, so.
Well,
I've been relatively busy.
I believe the Dead Sea Scrolls have the have at least fragments of Genesis, and if they didn't confirm that word structure, then it would have become controversial in terms of like publishing it in the Bibles that way. It's an admitted problem as far as I know. It's something that I knew about even when I was in high school. I remember hearing about this plural pronoun in Genesis being a problem for translators, and usually it's accounted for by Christians as referring to the Trinity, when really that would have been miraculous, because that concept of the Trinity wasn't a thing until way after Christianity was a thing. So it's just kind of silly. But unless you're looking at magic and God could do anything, so that's not silly if that's your conditions.
I've heard people say it was the royal we, which I don't think existed in. That's a sort of an English thing.
I don't know about that. Yeah.
We are not.
When I refer to myself as we or us, that's a very English royalty kind of thing to do. And as to Steve, as to the word create, where there is some discussion as to whether or not create there means create ex nihilo, without any material whatsoever, which is if you're a cosmos, not universe, if you're a cosmos creationist by Yahweh, then you have to say God created all things from no thing. Okay? You have to say it that way. But the word create right there, when they're reading it and they have a concept of what it's supposed to mean to the modern man, if you look up there, the Hebrew had a word which meant create from nothing, and they had a word which meant to reform or repurpose something. Okay, the create right there means to reform or repurpose. So the actual read is in the beginning of what you should even care about. Powerful beings recreated or reformed or repurposed where you live. That's a better reading.
Well, God has a lot to answer for. That's all I've got to say.
He can't answer you. Sorry.
Yeah. Well, he's busy.
No. Sets of ideals don't answer questions. Well, they do answer questions, but you can't ask them a question and expect them to respond verbally. That's not going to happen. It's not an AI. It's not both able to respond and unconscious. Okay, where are we at, guys?
Let's spend
anybody in the side chat. Anyone in the side chat who wants to do something, write it down real quick, and we'll try to address you directly. What do you got, guys? I ran you over rudely, but
no problem. I'm kind of spent personally.
Okay.
It was awesome.
Well, I thought it was a fun exercise. I can't say I'm surprised by the results. That all the root-based ideas showed up in a cogent way that is different from what you read in the King James. That's not surprising to me. And doesn't make sense well with what the King James translators came up with. And I'm going to assert, though it's hard to show, that all of that is based in their dogmatic view and presuppositions based on traditional religion, has nothing to do with the Bible at all. Nothing at all. That they were able to get those words out. In fact, I believe they did what people accuse me of doing, which I don't do.
Project into the text.
I mean, I was an anti-theist. I didn't have a religious presupposition except for that it's all crap. That was my only religious presupposition.
Okay, are these wonderful viewers of yours going to ask any more questions?
I wanted to give them a minute more because there is time delay plus typing, so I want to give them about a minute to do something.
Delay, I've noticed.
What's that?
There's a significant time delay as we speak, and then waiting for the YouTube live feed to catch up.
That's true. I think it's usually something around a full minute.
Oh. We're speaking to you from the future.
Yeah.
I think it'd be interesting to dig into these kind of methodology issues next time. I don't know really how to formalize it, but talk more about what gets lost, maybe what happens, why it's been so poorly done up until now. What's that should be accounted for, I think, or at least I'm curious about it.
I tell you what, I think it boils down to, and this, I'm sorry I'm so harsh, but I think this is true. I think it boils down to, if your mechanic doesn't know what's wrong with your car, he's going to tell you that it's vapor locked. It just means he's a bad mechanic. That's all it means. Now, did he have a choice about being a bad mechanic? I think there's been no choice about them being bad mechanics. That is, the theologians, the tradition, have been restricted in some way, saving stuff for the end. And that's obvious when Jesus says to the apostles during end times, by necessity, okay, either Jesus happens in end times or he's not the prophet and he's wrong and he's a liar. Okay, and there's no choice about that. I tell you now that this generation shall not pass. If he was wrong about that before these things come, every jot and tittle, before these things come to pass, if he was wrong about that, then he's not the prophet. Throw it away.
That's right.
By the rules of the Bible, if he's wrong about the prophecy, he's not the prophet. Shut him down. Okay, in which case, he's not your Jesus. Throw it away. But if you want to say he is your Jesus, then he has to say it when it mattered. Well, when would it be perfectly moral, perfectly upright, and perfectly just to say, this generation shall not pass? Leave your mother, your father, your sister, your brother. Think not of the future and take no plans. Don't bring an extra jacket with you. Don't bring an extra snack. Just come with me and go to God. And here's something really profound that no one seems to notice, that struck me right in the forehead like a brick. No one seems to talk about it. The most natural question for a non-believer to ask is, anybody? Prove to me that. Prove to me that.
Oh, prove to me that. Yeah.
Whatever. Prove to me that God exists, that Jesus was the Messiah, that he was crucified and died and was buried and rose again on the third. Prove any of it. The most natural question for anybody is, prove to me that. Why doesn't anyone anywhere in the Bible go to Jesus or any theist and go, prove to me that heaven exists, prove to me that God exists, prove to me that angels exist, prove to me that any of it? Not even a topic. Why? Because they can see it in the freaking sky. It was right above their heads. It's not a question worth asking. And it's the most obvious missing thing from the Bible. The entire idea is not there.
But if somebody expressed an atheistic thought, they might have been in incredible trouble.
In what group? When?
Well, if we know that Jesus was essentially executed because of heresy.
Why are you saying was?
Well, we Christians take that as granted, as read.
Yeah, they do.
But if you, we know that for blasphemy, if you've watched The Life of Brian, can get you stoned to death. And it might be blasphemy to say God doesn't exist. They were, there's a passage.
No one ever says that either, though, Steve. No one ever says you're full of crap. No one ever says that.
Well, Romans takes I can't remember which passage in Romans it is, but they actually take time to discuss atheists and says they're abominable and do terrible things and whatnot.
Okay.
And so I wouldn't, if someone expressed that God wasn't real and the temple wasn't holy of holies, they might have found themselves in serious trouble.
Well, which God do they have to profess is real, or they're in trouble?
The God of Israel.
Okay, you might be in trouble with the Sanhedrin in that time frame. Would you be in trouble otherwise?
I don't know. But we know
in
that.
fact, The Hebrew people, although gaining some power at the time, were not by any means a majority. They were not the most popular religion. Most cities had their own private gods that were not Yahweh. They had statues and structures. I mean, you already know about Parthenon, et cetera, et cetera.
Sure.
Okay. Well, that predates the Jews.
Well, I would. I still say that I would be very worried if I were walking around and letting people know that I was an atheist and that gods didn't exist. I don't. If I were in a Jewish community, I'd be very worried about someone pointing at me and saying "stone him."
I think you could have gotten away with it in a Roman occupied place. I think they were pretty open-minded to stuff, you know.
The reason that I assert that this is not the history of this planet and what people actually did in reaction to these stories that are prophetic is quite irrelevant to the story itself, which is why people can be completely wiped out and show back up is because they didn't get physically wiped out in the first place. And the reason that I assert all that and that why Jesus must be in end times in order that he is the prophet in the first place and that the story demands that he is if I just hit the basics of the life of Christ, there's no Christian on this planet who deny it's Christ. If I just told the truth about God, was killed, buried, 3.5 days later, rose from the dead, 40 days later, ascended into heaven, they already know it's Jesus. I don't have to say anything more than that. I can go into more depth. I could say, well, if somebody hurts him, they get the highway to hell. I could say that. That's part of the Jesus story. But all of that can be taken from the description of the two witnesses and can't be something besides Jesus. Which thing, that life, happens in the second half of end times. Now, I don't know how a Christian can say that's Jesus, only Jesus, so help me God. The two witnesses aren't Jesus. I don't know how they can say both, but they will. I've watched them sprint backwards at 1,000 miles an hour when I point it out.
Yep.
But it's just plain as the nose on your face, and only dogma would keep you from going, oh yeah, gosh, I totally see that.
All right. Well,
yeah, you guys are obviously spent.
Yes. Sorry we weren't very lively, but we did what we could.
First, just an hour of this is a lot. Statistically speaking, your brain case, your skull itself, lets off some more than 15 to 20% more heat than normal in a relaxed state when you're thinking hard. You're literally, let's see, every 13 minutes of hard thought is about equivalent of 2 miles of jogging in energy use.
Wow.
And heat release. It's like, yeah, like, dude, you're working. Okay. It uses energy. It really does. It's not free. So I can appreciate your situation.
All righty. Hey, well, thank you very much for having us on, Richard. It's been great as always.
I can't express to you how much of you might not really believe me, and I can't really express it well, and I couldn't say it as strongly as I feel it. I love you. I love you, and I deeply appreciate the time that we spend together talking about this stuff. I really do. It's a privilege.
I am overwhelmed with gratitude. Thank you, Richard.
Me too. Thanks for your time, fellas.
Thank you for your time, gentlemen. Peace and respect to you both. And to everyone who came and watched Iron and Moon Medi. And I'm RNGD Gaming. I don't know how to say that. Gaming. And let's see, there was somebody else here who dropped in. It was Pi. Thanks a lot for dropping by. Also, Pi, I appreciate you. So thank you all very much. And I hope we'll see each other all, technology willing, and the creek don't rise this time next Wednesday. And the most likely problem will be they're going to change Mac's schedule. He can't get like 3 weeks in a row in the same schedule.
So tough right now.
Poor fella. They're always doing that to him. I think they love you. You know, they always put the work on the workhorse, not on the lazy one. You know, so take it as a compliment where you can.
That's true. I appreciate it.
But until next time, guys, peace and respect to you all of you who have participated and may watch in the future. And I want you all to know that I truly do look forward to the day. We're all great friends. Until next time.
Bye-bye.